Urgent, this has happened. Syrskyi has announced a global offensive, the AFU is launching a counterattack, the 2026 victory plan is in action. Shock, the Iron General is back in the game. The internet is abuzz with the news. Zaluzhnyi returns as commander-in-chief of the AFU. Triumph in Kupiansk, revenge for Kharkiv region, lightning assault on Kharkiv. The city council building is under Ukrainian control. Russia's elite units are turning to ashes. All this and more coming up. Watch until the end. Ukraine welcomes you today. Renata Zlanov here with the latest updates. The AFU is preparing a hellish surprise for the occupiers. The tactic of asymmetric strikes is already scorching the enemy. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi shook the information space with a sensational statement. Ukraine is moving to a global offensive. No one will sit in deep defense anymore. It's time to claw victory with our teeth. While the Kremlin, in a delirium, keeps postponing the timeline for capturing Ukraine, throwing its last reserves into the meat grinder, Kyiv is preparing the final verdict for Putin's plans.
That's why we will conduct a strategic defensive operation. At the same time, we understand that victory cannot be achieved by staying on the defensive. Therefore, accordingly, we will conduct offensive operations, fight to maintain operational initiative, because this forces the enemy to commit and withdraw significant manpower, weapons, and ammunition in order to contain our active actions.
As for a complete turning point in the war, this year the commander-in-chief has already named clear conditions for the collapse of the Russian Federation. A technological knockout, the power of our own military-industrial complex, and unwavering Western support will do their job. According to the general, Ukraine has everything it needs to finally defeat the aggressor. Meanwhile, the Russians might be in for a surprise at the front. A new surprise? Zaluzhnyi will return to the post of commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. This blew up the internet. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced an important meeting with the Iron General the day before.
We met with Valery Zaluzhnyi. I thanked him for his work as part of Ukraine's team. And it's important that we are all together defending Ukraine's independence, our national interests, and our people.
The head of state said that during the conversation they discussed diplomatic tasks that are currently relevant and could strengthen Ukraine. More detailed information is not being disclosed. Nevertheless, Ukrainians are linking Zaluzhny's unexpected arrival in the capital with the possibility of him being appointed to a new position. It should be noted that recently the media reported that Valery Zaluzhnyi is preparing to leave his post as Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom. According to New Voice Radio, he may officially say goodbye to London in January. Allegedly, during his previous visit to Kyiv, Zaluzhnyi personally informed President Zelensky of his desire to step down as ambassador. And things are about to get even more interesting.
He and the president discussed various positions for Zaluzhnyi, from prime minister to head of the president's office. But at that time, he showed no interest.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. According to information from various sources, at one point Zaluzhnyi was indeed considering several scenarios. Among them was even a return to the post of commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. At this time, news broke about a lightning-fast operation by our forces. Ukrainian troops established control over the Kupiansk city council building. The operation took place as part of the city's de-blockade under the command of the 2nd Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine. Currently, Ukrainian units are finishing clearing the city of the remaining enemy forces.
The Kupiansk operation proves that, thanks to planning, the training of commanders and staff, and the high-quality preparation of units, everything we call the Kharkiv method, it is possible to successfully stop and destroy the enemy, noted the commander of the 2nd Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, Kharkiv.
In addition, the Institute for the Study of War reported that Ukrainian defense forces have advanced toward Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region and near Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. Breaking news! Kharkiv region has become a trap for the occupiers. The Russians' attempt to launch a new offensive has turned into a disaster for them. The defense forces not only repelled the attack, but literally wiped them out. The enemy's assault groups. Putin's generals are in a panic near Huliaipole in Zaporizhzhia. The enemy command is truly feeling the heat. All the latest developments on the front line are covered in the following report.
The first attempt to break through the border this year. In the Kharkiv region, the occupiers tried to advance toward the village of Decisive. The attack was repelled, and more than 24 assault troops were eliminated, according to the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine.
The Guard Brigade of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine thwarted an attempt by Russian occupiers to break through the state border in the Kharkiv region. This happened near the village of Decisive. The problem is that after such incursions, the Russian armed forces apparently lack the strength to build on their success. So last year, they were unable to establish any significant new footholds on the Ukrainian side of the border. And let's hope they won't succeed this year either.
The defense forces note that previously the enemy would appear in small groups near the border, probably probing the situation. But at the beginning of this week, over the course of several days, after amassing certain forces, they tried to attack the positions of border units with small infantry groups but in large numbers.
Now, obviously, they are searching for weak spots in order to open up new directions and try to advance. I think these are just tactical moves for now. It's unlikely that this will lead to any serious breakthroughs comparable to what happened, for example, in Podvochansk or in the Sumy region and so on.
At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces are recording increased enemy activity along almost the entire line of contact. The most tense situation remains in the Zaporizhzhia direction, in addition to the ongoing assaults. In Huliaipole, fighting has resumed with renewed intensity for the settlement of Stepnohirsk. The enemy's main objective is to advance closer to the regional center.
If Stepnohirsk ends up completely in the red zone and the enemy is already directly in the area of this estuary, then obviously the enemy will be able to gain a foothold in this location and bring in the necessary resources. Artillery units, including both tube and rocket artillery, are already directly shelling the suburbs of Zaporizhzhia and possibly Zaporizhzhia itself at the southern edge of the city.
However, since this has not happened yet, the command still has time to hold this direction and reinforce the defense forces. Analysts believe that additional reserves are available here. Moreover, even though the enemy has entered the city, there is no question of any real control over the territory. That's simply not the case.
The Russians continue to establish themselves throughout the entire settlement. At the same time, they control very little because they've run into basements in small groups, and now it's difficult to drive them out from there.
However, in the reports of Putin's generals, everything has long since been captured. For example, the day before, while reporting on successes at the front, the chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, exaggerated Russian achievements threefold, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Stories about capturing 8 settlements and more than 300 square kilometers of territory since the beginning of 2026 turned out to be false. At the same time, for some reason, Gerasimov did not mention the truth, namely how many people Russia lost over these 2 weeks. 14,120 soldiers. But that's not in the reports. There, everyone is advancing victoriously.
According to Gerasimov, the troops of the West Group are also engaged in street fighting and are completing the liberation of Kupiansk Uzlovy. On Tuesday, a video was published showing a Russian strike with Fabi 500 aerial bombs, reportedly near Kupiansk Uzlovy, according to the Institute for the Study of War. This indicates that the positions in this area are also held by the Ukrainian armed forces. According to the deep state map, Kupiansk Uzlovy is fully controlled by the Ukrainian armed forces, and this makes sense if you look at the map and Russia's positions in Kupiansk.
Gerasimov also did not forget to mention Pokrovsk in his reports. In the city which, according to official documents, has been captured for several months, Russia somehow managed to advance again. But in reality, even this did not happen.
Right now, we can say for certain that part of the territory of Pokrovsk, primarily the northeastern section of the high-rise district, is under the control of the Ukrainian army.
The situation in the assault units indirectly confirms that the number of Russian losses is accurate. For example, fighters say that in recent months, the number of foreigners among the prisoners has increased significantly. This points to 2 problems at once. First, there are too few Russians left, and second, Putin is afraid of those who remain.
Putin is well aware of all the risks of socioeconomic, of carrying out the next wave of mobilization, whether partial or even more so full mobilization. In order to prevent these negative, destructive processes in the Russian Federation, Russian emissaries are literally searching all over the world for people willing to earn money. And that's why it turns out there are now natives of African, Asian, and Middle Eastern countries in the ranks of the Russian army.
However, the Ukrainian armed forces are not picky. Ukraine is ready to destroy anyone who comes to our land with war. In the past 24 hours, their number has decreased by
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Upon completing the final official count for the afternoon, it was determined that there were exactly 1,370 people present at the venue, which is a significantly fewer number of total participants than the massive crowd we had originally anticipated seeing gathered here for the event today. General Zaluzhnyi is returning to Ukraine.
It's very difficult to change your line of work, but thanks to the fact that I've always studied and tried new things throughout my life, this process went smoothly for me and I feel right at home.
The concentration of rumors and information campaigns surrounding the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Valery Zaluzhny, is indeed extremely high right now.
There is a certain trail following Zaluzhny, which it has gradually evolved and solidified in the public consciousness as a widely recognized and enduring myth about a benevolent and compassionate general, a responsible patriot, and a highly respectable and principled diplomat.
The rumors were further fueled by the fact that Zaluzhny is currently in Ukraine and has already had a personal meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. The meeting took place at the president's office. During the meeting, they also discussed diplomatic tasks, according to the president.
He thanked him for his work as part of Ukraine's team. And it's important that we are all together defending Ukraine's independence, our national interests, our people. We discussed diplomatic tasks that are relevant now and can strengthen all of us, Ukraine, and our resilience. Glory to Ukraine!
The media are speculating that Zaluzhny is preparing to leave his diplomatic post in London and has allegedly expressed his desire to resign to the president of Ukraine.
Now, to elevate this image to the level of political leadership, it probably requires a constant presence in Kyiv, in Ukraine, especially during the most difficult period Ukraine is going through, with the intensified drone and missile attacks and an escalation of fighting on the front lines.
Zaluzhny's media advisor Oksana Torop denied this information at the end of the year. She stated that Zaluzhny remains in his position as ambassador and does not plan to resign.
As always, unnamed sources know everything about Zaluzhny and his plans. But nothing has changed. He continues to defend Ukraine's interests as ambassador to the United Kingdom.
At the end of autumn, Valery Zaluzhny shared his vision of how the war in Ukraine might end. He noted that a quick peace would mean the loss of independence. A long-term cessation of the war offers a chance for recovery.
When we talk about victory, to be honest, it means the destruction of the Russian Empire, and defeat means the complete occupation of Ukraine and its collapse. Everything else is just prolonging the war. We Ukrainians, of course, strive for complete victory, that is, the downfall of the Russian Empire.
At the end of December, journalists reported, citing sources, about plans for Zaluzhny to return to Ukraine and resign from his post as ambassador.
He and the president discussed various positions for Zaluzhny, from prime minister to head of the president's office. But at that time, he did not show any interest.
Perhaps Zaluzhny knows more, which is why he is ready to move on. According to other sources, for a certain period, Zaluzhny even considered the position of ambassador to the United States or head of the president's office.
There really was a conversation about recruiting Zaluzhny for one of the high-ranking positions. And throughout 2025, this was being discussed. But as many sources say, Zaluzhny definitely refused the position of head of the president's office. And I don't think that he or anyone else is seriously considering it, or that anyone is actually seriously considering him.
But Zaluzhny's return to the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine is extremely unlikely, since before his appointment as ambassador in July 2024, he underwent a military medical commission, which found the general unfit for military service and removed him from the register.
In order to take the position of commander-in-chief, Zaluzhny would need to be mobilized again, but he has been declared unfit. Of course, in our country, anything is possible, but his appointment is extremely unlikely. Moreover, it's unlikely that Zaluzhny himself even wants this. Taking the same position for a second time is always a political minus. In
the media space, rumors also surface from time to time about Zaluzhny allegedly intending to run in the elections. And
in a certain way, the ratings reflect this, the overall level of support, and the general perception of the situation within the armed forces of Ukraine in the territorial defense. A successful positioning as commander-in-chief, because he is associated precisely with the successful Kherson offensive operation, the liberation of Kherson, and attention to ordinary soldiers. About
the possible presidential ambitions of Valery Zaluzhny, people have been talking since April 2022.
it is obvious that sooner or later he would have had to return to Ukraine in order to find the starting point for his political ambitions and begin forming his own political team.
Zaluzhny's political activity and his personal influence continued to grow throughout the full-scale war. But while holding a position in the United Kingdom, he will not be able to build a team and move in that direction.
For the Americans, in some ways, Zaluzhny could be an even more difficult partner to work with than the current president, Zelensky. Although, for example, Zaluzhny could be supported by the United Kingdom and European countries,
Zaluzhny himself has never confirmed the rumors about his presidential ambitions. And in October 2025, he stated that he does not recognize any ideas of holding elections during the war. He does not create headquarters or parties and has no ties to political forces.
The whole audience wants me to ask you one question. Valery Fyodorovich, will you run? In order to answer this question, let's first get to the conditions under which these questions will become simpler, appropriate. When such conditions arise, as a person in public service, I will be ready to answer these questions.
But experts believe that the post of British ambassador is just an intermediate step in the career of the former commander-in-chief.
a former commander-in-chief associated with certain victories, then an ambassador that is a diplomat, which is directly related to the qualities that voters attribute to the office of president as the supreme leader, commander-in-chief, and as a key foreign policy actor. In other words, the person responsible for foreign policy. So, in fact, the position of ambassador actually adds a presidential flair to what is being prepared for his future role. This completes the full image of a future ready-to-serve president.
How he will be able to prove himself in the current situation and how events will unfold next is unknown. The central question remains, will Valery Zaluzhny truly have the desire and the capability to transition from his current role in the ambassador's office to the highest seat in the president's office? We are closely observing every detail of this developing political situation, and we will definitely provide you with comprehensive updates in our upcoming episodes.
The ring of death for the invaders. While Kremlin propaganda lies about successes, Ukrainian defenders are giving the enemy a hard time, a real firestorm. How are our assault groups seizing the initiative? Why are Russian generals panicking over their losses? Watch.
The gray zone in Huliaipole. The Russians are actively storming Ukrainian positions from the north, south, and west. However, they are unable to gain a foothold in the city itself. Well, it's
a large gray zone. Mostly the enemy attacks our positions in the outskirts on the northern, southern, and western approaches to Huliaipole. Inside Huliaipole itself, fighting continues between outgoing groups and those conducting reconnaissance and assault operations. The enemy faces roughly the same situation. They can't bring in consolidation groups.
The situation in Huliaipole remains one of the most difficult on the front. Ukrainian forces are operating in all parts of the city, trying to cut off the enemy's logistics. The occupiers, despite heavy losses, continue active assault operations.
The main objective of the occupiers is to try to bypass Huliaipole by flanking the Ukrainian grouping. Why are the main actions concentrated specifically on the flanks? This is an attempt to take direct control over the logistics of Ukraine's defense forces. In other words, they are using their favorite tactic of so-called small cauldrons. But I want to emphasize once again that despite the Russian side's claims of full control in Huliaipole, the situation does not correspond to reality.
According to various estimates, the Russians are losing about 250 to 300 people per day in this direction. That is why the enemy has already changed the composition of the brigades and assault units attacking Huliaipole twice. The main Russian tactic is small groups. The enemy sends assault groups of 3 to 4 people, advancing with electronic warfare support under the cover of drones and artillery.
At present, the city is indeed almost entirely in the gray zone. But Ukrainian assault units are operating throughout the entire settlement. A similar infiltration tactic is also being used by the Russian occupiers. Their tactic is to operate in small assault groups of 2 to 8 people. Despite the difficult weather conditions, the redeployment of operational reserves to this direction, and the enemy's total air superiority, the Russian side's claim of full control over Huliaipole does not correspond to reality. Moreover, the occupiers are unable to bring so-called consolidation groups into the city. In other words, after the assault troops, the actual units of the occupying forces are supposed to follow, securing positions on the front line, where they have managed to break through the defenses of the Ukrainian defense forces. However, this is not the case in the Huliaipole direction.
The Southern Defense Forces report that there are about 25 combat engagements every day.
Fighting continues both on the outskirts and in the center. Combat clashes can last 45 to 50 minutes. In fact, there are 25 engagements per day. There is constant noise and gunfire. One group goes to storm, then another follows. Drones and artillery are in action.
The Russians are not neglecting air attacks either. The enemy is using aircraft and is massively deploying strike drones. In addition, according to the Southern Defense Forces, the occupiers are preparing thermobaric drone strikes on Ukrainian positions in the Huliaipole area. According
to our intelligence in the Huliaipole direction, a few days ago, Russian unmanned aerial vehicle units received about 1,500 thermobaric hand grenades. These are intended to be dropped on our positions.
Zaporizhzhia region, particularly Huliaipole, is one of Russia's priorities after Donbass. Here, the enemy is trying to widen the front in order to disperse the Ukrainian armed forces and strengthen their position for upcoming negotiations.
The escalation of the situation in the Huliaipole direction is purely informational and political in nature. Let me explain what this is about. Lacking the ability to achieve tactical successes either in the Pokrovsk or Kupiansk directions, and moreover, having suffered both military and ideological defeats, I remind you, there were statements at the highest representative level of the occupying country about taking full control of these settlements. The Russian occupiers are trying to compensate for these defeats with tactical advances in the Zaporizhzhia direction, which is secondary, which is not a strategic direction for them. The reason I say that, for them, this primarily has informational and political significance. Huliaipole is the second largest settlement in the controlled territories of Zaporizhzhia region. Accordingly, establishing control over it would allow the Russians to increase their own leverage in the negotiation process.
As for the actual Huliaipole, the Russians' goal here is not simply the occupation of a populated area. The fact is that there are railway junctions nearby, and according to military political observer Oleksandr Kovalenko, if the Russians succeed in their plans, they will be able to create a springboard for a potential offensive. In Zaporizhzhia,
if the Russians succeed in their plans, they could potentially reach the territory of Pokrovskoye, Dnipropetrovsk region. A bridgehead will be created before Huliaipole, which will be provided with logistics for 80 combined arms armies. This is 250 to 300,000 people, which is enough for a potential offensive in Zaporizhzhia. For context, there are currently 100,000 occupiers concentrated in the Huliaipole and Pokrovsky directions.
that is precisely why Huliaipole is not just a mere geographic point on the map, but a strategically vital and highly significant settlement that the armed forces of Ukraine continue to defend with unwavering courage and bravery, while consistently inflicting heavy losses on the invading occupation forces as the battle continues.